Hello, everybody, and welcome to another LinkedIn Live event brought to you by SAE Government Technologies. For those of you who don't know, my name is Mark Pickett. I'm the Technology Transfer Program Manager. We are super excited to welcome in a couple of guests today, two individuals from the company called GRIMM. We have Jennifer Tisdale, the CEO, and Matt Carpenter, the Senior Vice President of Technology and Security Research. And the reason I'm so excited today is because we're going to get a hacker's perspective about the topic of cybersecurity and autonomous vehicles. So please, Jen, Matt, please introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your company and your role.
First of all, thank you so much for having us here today, Mark. I really appreciate the opportunity. But as I am the CEO at GRIMM, we are a cyber research firm. I came here specifically to work with Matt Carpenter when I first met Matt and his team and the work that they were doing with autonomous systems. It was head and shoulders above the rest, the type of innovation, the type of research, the way that they were building a niche within the embedded system cybersecurity community back then, which was 2012 or 2013 when the practice started. The company began a couple of years prior to that. It was just really, I think, a real milestone within the cybersecurity and in particular, the automotive community. So I came here happily, not to be a hacker. I am not the hacker in this conversation. Of course, it is Matt. But I came here to help build the business model around the business of breaking. And Matt and I and the rest of our team have had a great time trying to figure out what's next and where the industry is going so that we can be ready for them.
Thank you, Jen. Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Carpenter, and I'd like to point out that this may be the hacker perspective in the agenda, but it's definitely also the hacker's CEO perspective, because what Jen throws out there is always so full of gold nuggets that I want to shut up and let her talk a lot. Yeah, I got involved in computer exploitation back in 2004. Learned how to do software reverse engineering and exploitation and hardware reversing and exploitation. And wow, 10 years ago, last month, Bryce and the founder invited me to join GRIMM to start the critical infrastructure team, or it's now called Sci-Fi, the Cyber Physical Systems team.
TM, that is trademark.
Thank you, Jen. To bring nation state level exploitation experience and knowledge and focus to make the world a better place, whether that's in government, military, or commercial side, for making our critical infrastructure stronger, better, more resilient. And so far, we've been doing a pretty good job. It's been a lot of work, but we're surrounded by amazing people doing incredible work. So,
excellent. Yeah, thank you for that. And I will point out that Matt did not hack our backgrounds. That actually Jen and I figured out how to be at the same place at the same time. So that was pretty awesome. Pretty proud of myself. So for the audience, again, thanks for joining us. If you have a question, please type it in the comment section, and we'll get to the end of the program and we'll read those questions and see if we can stump Jen and Matt. So again, yeah, have a question, type the question in the comment section. Let's go ahead and get started. Just give us a high-level perspective of the landscape, the cybersecurity landscape in the context of autonomous vehicles from your.
So autonomous vehicles, along with autonomous vehicles, have an interesting set of constraints. When it comes to cybersecurity, oftentimes the initial things that come to mind for autonomous vehicles, as opposed to just connected vehicles, are the simple fact that there's probably not somebody in charge of the vehicle that can defend the vehicle. So imagine an autonomous taxi, for example, with nobody driving, and there's an interesting little port or a part of the a panel over on the left-hand side that nobody's there to tell you not to touch. And maybe it gives you access to the vehicle systems. Maybe it gives you access to an uplink. So that's the type of thing that differentiates autonomous from connected. That and manipulating autonomous vehicles, AI, and programming, knowing that they're not supposed to run you over. And this plays out in New York City, but it more plays out in the military vehicles. If you're in a hostile area with a military convoy that's automated, and this is a years-long conversation. The fact of the matter is, the people who get killed the most in a convoy are the people driving. They've noticed that if they don't have somebody in the driver's seat, fewer people will get killed by far. And so they're putting a lot of effort into protecting our soldiers by automating. I love that. Automating their convoys. The problem is, we've already shown that IEDs given to a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old are not outside the realm of possibility. Now imagine a 4-year-old that's just been told to go lay down in front of this vehicle. The vehicle, assuming that it recognizes that the kid is a kid and it's not going to run them over, suddenly that convoy is at the mercy of this small child and whoever's controlling them.
Yeah.
From there, physical security of your vehicles are really important. Now, oftentimes there's somebody with a gun in the back of the vehicle, so maybe that's I don't want to overstate it too much, but these are all concepts that we're talking about, where it's.
Matt, if I may jump in,
yeah.
Where are we at in terms of in a lot of environments like the armor space, for example? There's more and more new threats, and there's more and more new armor systems trying to catch up to those new threats. Is there a gap like that in cybersecurity with respect to autonomous vehicles? I mean, how far behind are we? Give us a sense of, are we on target? Are we keeping up with the pace of nefarious actors, or are we behind?
So the cat and mouse game that you're describing is the same all throughout cybersecurity. There's always, as long as there are people who are wanting to leverage cybersecurity issues for their own ends against some adversary, we will continue to have this cat and mouse game. Now, the benefit, as opposed to what you just described a second ago, the benefit is that for the last, how long? I can math, I swear. For the last 8 years or so, we've had a lot of attention put on connected vehicles. So as far as cybersecurity is concerned, autonomous is gaining the value of heavily hitting on the need for securing your connected vehicle systems to start. So from that regard, we're actually doing fairly well with the base, the actual vehicle itself, how to hack it over the cellular signal, how to hack it over your tire pressure management ISM band radio or your Bluetooth. These things, we've been putting a lot of effort. We need a lot more. Please don't take that to say that, hey, we're all great, call it quits. We need a lot more. However, as opposed to the Jeep hack in 2015, where we'd not paid any attention. Now, that's not saying that we haven't been talking about cybersecurity since 2010 about vehicles, but it wasn't until the Jeep hack of 2015 where my wife and daughters, who are definitely not technology or not computer savvy, they're hearing about car hacking for the first time. We've got a lot more. We've had a lot more concern and a lot of energy put into it since then. Autonomous systems. We have been looking at cybersecurity for autonomous systems for nearly as much time. We're talking maybe 2016 is when I first ran into autonomous systems cybersecurity. Was it 2016 or 15? I don't remember. With a great conversation with a good friend, Darius Mikulski, talking about robotic military vehicles. Partly why I'm so interested is that conversation sparked something inside of me. So, go ahead.
No, please finish your thought.
I keep trying to bring it back to the actual question asked, so I apologize. But we have yet to discover where we're weak in autonomous vehicles. That's the end of the conversation.
I think I'd like to add a couple of 2 cents, not from a hacker perspective, but from an economics perspective and government perspective. And I want us to be very careful to not conflate the two different worlds that we're talking about, one being commercial automotive and the other potentially being autonomous systems for a military platform or application. So I am a volunteer with the National Defense Industrial Association. I am the cyber director for the Michigan chapter and lead their initiatives for embedded system cybersecurity. One of the biggest differentiators between what we see overseas in a global perspective for defense or national security is that other countries are funding more robustly offensive research practices, tools, and tactics. We're doing it here also, but it is not applicable to our commercial market in the same way that it may be applied in other countries' industries and commercial markets. And so I think we have to be cognizant that we are not comparing apples to apples when we talk about commercial autonomy versus military autonomous systems. There is a barrier of difference there, and the economic drivers behind that are percolating every day with what that could mean from a national security perspective. I would point out briefly in the 2023 cyber strategy that was published by DoD, it did not include embedded systems. It did include critical infrastructure. And I think that is indicative of what we see from global events, geopolitical global events, whether it be Russia, Ukraine, whether it's Gaza and Israel, whether it's China, right? I think because of that, we're paying more attention to the CI, to the critical infrastructure. But my professional opinion would be that that also has to include autonomous systems and vehicles, because if we are able to get capabilities of Matt and team or others around the globe who are doing this research come across something in which it can be enabled to be, what's the right word, Matt? Weaponized, maybe. Weaponized. We could be looking at commercial vehicles being used for purposes that were never intended for them to be used for. I will put this on the table for our automotive friends, or especially our domestic automotive friends. Right, I know that they tend to shudder at the notion of the Hollywood-esque concepts, and I deeply appreciate that. Because we can get lost in the sauce, right? We can get lost in the coolness of that, what that means and what that could be. It's a rabbit hole that's never ending. But I think that we
Fast and Furious 8.
Yeah. Or the new one that's on Netflix too. Somebody just mentioned that to me yesterday with Julia Roberts. I can't remember what it's called. But we're getting a lot of glorified hacker cinema. And I don't think that we're keeping up with what's reality and what is dramatic, and where will those two worlds potentially collide. And that's something I think that we need to be mindful of if we're talking about national security, is that others are looking at that more robustly than we are. And I'll pause there for now.
Well, so I want to double click on that for just a second, if you don't mind, Matt.
Go ahead.
Okay, when we see a geopolitical event, it gets our attention and maybe gets a response out of our government. What needs to be done organically here, Jen? Do you think, in terms of trying to create awareness about the problem, about the vulnerabilities, and then how we get that funded? What do you think it's going to take organically?
I think we have a lot of people, it's not militarily, it's not unlike commercially, in the sense that we have a lot of people rowing in the same direction, but they're not harmonized. They're not syncing up with each other. I think we have a guise of information sharing that's out there, but we're not doing it. And I say it apprehensively, because I know there are business rationales behind it. We don't want to give our competitors an edge because we're oversharing our vulnerabilities with our particular products commercially. And we don't want to publish too much to which a nefarious actor in another country could read or see or understand, right? So we want to info share, but we have to do so cautiously. I think we need to do that in a real way. We really need to be focused on community building and cybersecurity. And if I'm talking too fast, please give me a nonverbal cue. I tend to do that when I get excited.
if I'm keeping up with you, you're doing fine.
Okay. But I am an advocate for cyber community building, and we need more of it. And we need to get to a place where industry and government can let down their guard. That sounds a little rose-colored glasses, I know. But we need to be able to have those conversations in a way that helps lower those barriers, to take away the fear for industry that it's going to be somehow turned into a regulatory conversation, and hence help us all do what we need to do, which is, create technologies that are used for the protection of our citizens and for the protection of our warfighters. And until we can get on the same page, I think we're going to really be struggling with that. And some of it is happening in good faith. They get budget, right? You get budget flow down from the mothership, if you will, right? It goes to DOE, or it goes to the FTC or the FCC or DOT or FAA, and they get their budget to do a certain goal and they move forward, but they're not talking to each other. I think that in industry too.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that perspective, and I think you highlighted something, and that's the environment. Creating an environment, a neutral, convening environment where people can come and collaborate and communicate. And I think I might even know a company that does that. A shameless plug for SAE ITC. But anyway, Matt, I think you wanted to comment a little further. I interrupted you. I apologize.
So many comments. Oh, by the way, Jen, you missed X, Y, Z, and F, I think, in those 3-letter acronyms you threw. I actually want to piggyback onto her comments and say that in addition to creating the environment where we can collaborate, we can make better security, we also want to be focused on workforce development and creating spaces and environments that entice and encourage the curiosity of younger, or just maybe younger to the field people. Because we desperately need it to be okay. We need it to be normalized. We need people like myself and my colleagues to be viewed as potential helpers and not the adversary.
I think that's been a long conversation that we've had at GRIMM, and I'm sure within other pockets of the community as well, is how do we take the stigma away from being a hacker, right? It's always used with such a negative connotation, but it really takes all of us to come together to inform these discussions and to inform how we should design with cybersecurity in mind for product. And we find ourselves, I think, in a better place today. I just lumped myself in with you, Matt, so apologies, but I think we find ourselves in a better place today than we were just a few short years ago. And that's incredible, considering this niche area of the industry is still pretty young.
Well, I'll tell you how ignorant I was when I first met you, Jen, and somebody said she works for GRIMM. I'm like, oh, what does GRIMM do? Oh, they're hackers. I was like, why are they not in prison?
Well, there you go.
Jen, this is gonna sound sappy, but I'll say it anyway. I would not be me where I am today if it weren't for you being around. So I appreciate it. You can lump yourself in with me anytime.
All right. Hear that?
So yeah, I have so many things I want to jump off on there. Remember Fate of the Furious, the Fast and the Furious 8 movie where they had the raining cars scene? Massive super hacker leveraged thousands of 0 days, which is kind of amusing and something I won't go into right now, but to take over hundreds of vehicles in, I forget what city, it doesn't matter, including a bunch of vehicles in parking garages. And as a foreign dignitary comes around the corner, hundreds of cars come piling out of the parking garage, the multi-layer parking garage, and just demolish the area around him, all autonomously. So when talking about autonomous vehicles, they represent different and unique and novel attack vectors, which I'll talk about again in a second. But one of the things to keep in mind is it's not necessarily the attack vector that changes as much as the effects. So for anybody who doesn't understand or have any experience, when you're attacking a computer system, you're finding a weakness. You have to have some way to influence the computer system, most often a network connection over the internet or over wireless or something. And then once you exploit that weakness, you may have some extra control or ability, but you've got to do something with it. And so what happens after you throw the exploit is called post-exploitation. And that's the I took over a machine and put malware on it, put ransomware or some sort of a command and control thing back so that I can control the computer system that I took over. What autonomous vehicles offer that traditional vehicles don't is a whole bunch of logic that actually is intended to drive the car. So imagine with me, I exploit your 2020, what are you driving, Jen? 2022 Jeep, what is it?
Bronco.
Oh, a Bronco, okay.
They ask to drive my car often. I'm very apprehensive, but go on.
So I exploit that over your telematics uplink to the internet, which is, it's a cellular connection, has some sort of ties to the internet, and then ends up back at Ford, in this case, in their back end, and Ford can issue all sorts of commands to it, but not going there right now. I hack your Bronco somehow. I am then forced to manually drive that thing. I have to write the code to drive that thing, to do something with it. Now, oftentimes, I think worst case is actually just let you drive and wait until you're doing 70 down a highway and then steer you hard left into oncoming traffic. So, that's something. But imagine then.
He's thought about that too much, y'all. Go on.
So now imagine an autonomous vehicle where I can say, all right, just drive the frick to this location and do this thing. It becomes hacking for DoorDash. Go pick me up these drugs and then bring the car back, dump off the drugs at this location, and go home. Like, the owner may never know it was gone. And I don't have to write a whole lot of code to make that happen. It becomes a very empowering technology when it comes to hacking. So that's what I wanted to throw out there. AV makes the post-exploitation tasks far more powerful.
I see.
And
all right.
Thinking. Now, as far as attack vectors, the ways to influence and hack an autonomous vehicle, there are a number of different new systems on autonomous vehicles, or systems that are used in new ways, like, for example, forward and rear-facing cameras on the sides, radar, LiDAR, and there's probably audio stuff in there somewhere. Now imagine each of these as a relatively new addition to a car, because they kind of are. We've been having the assisted driving for a while. They're using some of these technologies to warn you, hey, you're about to run into something. Flick that little light on, or vibrate your steering wheel, or although that vibrating steering wheel may cause me to run into somebody one of these days. So there's a lot of research that's been done. This is novel research. It's not like take over the car research, but it's definitely influence the car in strange ways, where LiDAR, for example, is spoofed. You can make a car think that somebody is standing in its way and nobody's there. There are radar tricks, and there's camera tricks, and you can do things with lasers, and you can render these systems inoperable or somehow degraded. And then you're down to what the logic is internal to the vehicle for what to do when I actually am in driving blind. If I but imagine LiDAR, radar, and hitting the cameras and making them all basically disagree about what's going on. What's the car do? Now, I grew up in Flint, Michigan. I've been around the automotive industry for my entire life. And I've had the opportunities to tour a number of facilities. And one of the things that I got to see was how they basically rain down hellfire and brimstone on their vehicular systems before they let them out into the field, literally causing lightning bolts to see how the things behave, and trying to make sure that and I think that was GM. I got to see that from, and so it's a form of robustness testing that happens on the physical side of the vehicle. We have something, we have an idea of something like that for software, but it's not nearly as robust. It's not been around very long, and I'm not sure that everybody really has it. So one of the things that we need to be doing with autonomous vehicles is running more than just simulations, but simulations as well, but a combination of simulations on the autonomous driving software for, okay, radar gets knocked out. Radar does weird things, LiDAR, and hitting all of the major new core systems that autonomous brings to the table, and making sure that the software keeps working, that we're still driving, or better yet, not driving if we're driving blind.
Matt, let's jump on that for a second. So when you think in terms of cybersecurity in the community, it takes a village, right? There's a whole supply chain. You've got OEMs, you've got people involved in the supply chain, you've got government policy shaping. What is that? Maybe this is a question for you, Jen. I'm not sure, but what does that community look like, and is it well organized, or is it fragmented?
I'll let you answer first.
Thanks a lot. I think the quick answer is everyone is there. Whether or not they're siloed is another question. I think that we are still having some degrees of silo from industry to industry, meaning maybe somebody who's developing the communications aspect are not part of the R&D team within an OEM or the tier one supplier, what have you. So I think there's still some fragmentation. I'm hoping we get some comments. I'd love to hear from anyone in the audience who can share what's going on in there. But I think organizationally, even how they're structured, there's been some separation within one company, right? If we're talking about industry right now. So I think that we've seen some progress in how those, I'm going to call them teams or departments within a company, are starting to work together, or maybe they're being restructured under a CISO or a CIO within their organization. I think we're seeing contractual flow downs. This is true both within the government, within the DIB, defense industrial base, and commercial automotive, right? We're flowing down cybersecurity requirements for our products through our supply chain. The challenge with that becomes the smaller the supplier, the less likely they are to be able to have the cyber resources, budget, or expertise, or know-how to run those cybersecurity testing, if it's testing, right? Or gap analysis, or whatever the case might be. And so I think we have some more education to go. We've certainly made a lot of progress in a short period of time, but the short of it is there's a ways to go.
Gotcha.
So my response is a little harsher. It's hostile. We've got 50 to 100 years of OEMs and suppliers beating each other down for pennies, trying to push prices as low as possible, and it's been a very difficult arena for a long time. So typically, traditionally in the past, we've had from an electronics perspective, a smart components perspective, we've had OEMs that are the main integrators, the designers, and they farm out most of the actual vehicle creation to tier one, tier two suppliers. They give very specific specifications, saying, sorry for the redundancy there, but saying we need this thing to be like this, and we need the software to interface with the vehicle like this. And so then they basically, they have most of the software being developed by a bunch of different suppliers, oftentimes reduplicating efforts for operating systems. You know, we've got 6 different suppliers. Each one has to maintain their own operating system version or a software security stack for the different ECUs that they supply. What we're seeing right now is OEM starting to get smart to the fact that that's a really high cost to pay. They can actually do it cheaper to bring it back in-house and maintain the technology understanding in-house. So we're seeing the introduction of a software-defined vehicle, which is really cool because this is signs of the automotive industry growing. Because I remember a number of years ago, Tesla was the pariah. They were the non-Detroit U.S. company doing automotive, and they weren't given any respect. They were kind of treated as the enemy. And this is an example where Tesla has done something. I'm not going to say how well, because that's a religious debate, but they've done something that makes a lot of sense, and all the other OEMs are starting to take notice and wrap in some of the lessons learned into their own process. That is having one massive computer system that runs the vehicle, and creating, in many cases, creating virtual ECUs in that. Think of them as virtual machines in your laptop, which is actually not that far off. Instead of having your brake controller have its own computer, its own operating system, or developed firmware image, all that stuff, bringing that more central, it makes it easier to manage. It makes it easier to hack, maybe a little bit, but there's a lot of economies there that are driving the OEs to bring it all back in-house. So that will change the discussion over the next 5 or 10 years.
But I would add to that, if I could, because I feel like I'm very protective now, Matt. You've made me protective of the OEs. They have a big job in front of them, right? Like, they're balancing ICE vehicles and the emergence of EVs, and they're trying to redefine and redesign who and what they are. Some of them are trying to pitch as tech companies versus automotive companies, in particular within the supply chain. So there is a robust change that's happening, and it's a lot to balance. They have challenges with that. I think they know it. I think we know it too, maybe more so. But what I would present is that it is all still relatively new, from 100-year-old industry plus to something that's only 10 to 15 years old. It's going to ebb and flow. We're seeing pivots. When I came to GRIMM 6.5 years ago, I think it was still the Wild West, right, with automotive cybersecurity, and they didn't know what they didn't know. Here we are 6 years later, 6+ years later, and we're starting to see with the work of SAE and other bodies out of the UN, et cetera, with those standards that have been implemented. Some of the worry that I've heard you express, Matt, and others at GRIMM and others from some of our frenemies that are out there, is the fear that compliance to standards is the opposite of cybersecurity, that it creates the antithesis of the practice that we would like to see happen as security professionals, right? Where it's ongoing and innovative, and you're looking at what's next and what the next technology introduced into the system of systems might bring to the fore. And so I think that we can anticipate additional change within the industry collective. 5 years from now, I don't think it'll look anything like it does today. And 5 years ago, it didn't look like today now, right? So we're going to continue to see that evolution of practices happen. And it's incumbent on us, SAE, GRIMM, others like us in our whole community of automotive cybersecurity, to talk to each other and keep pace and to go to what's coming next. And let followers deal with what's here today.
I don't think I was beating up on OEMs. I really have. I was trying to paint a really generic picture there, where I'm not favoring any OEMs or
just super protective,
suppliers.
Matt.
I'm starting to see some questions come in. That's fantastic. A reminder to the audience: if you have questions, we're running toward the end of time. Please enter those in the comment section. Probably one of the last question or so here. What do we have?
Wait.
Go ahead, Matt.
I wanted to clarify. I think that the story I'm trying to make sure gets a lot of thoughts around GRIMM is that standards are a good start. They're not necessarily the antithesis, but by standardizing, Mark, I hope I don't upset you here. By standardizing, the goal is to reduce or remove or limit the amount of thinking required. I don't think that's the actual goal, but it's kind of the goal, having been on several standards bodies or standards committees generating things. It's trying to remove much of the unknown and make it so that you've got an easy button wherever you can have an easy button. The thing that we're pushing for within GRIMM and other some of our competimates is that we have a good starting point of standards, because they're vital. Yeah. If we don't have standards, we can't standardize on what things to test, what things to poke at. Now we also have to always have the creative part too. So standards get you to a base minimum, but that's not actually security. That's a good start. Kind of like NERC CIP for energy grid. Nobody would ever tell you NERC CIP was enforcing security, but it was a heck of a good start for a lot of companies who weren't even close. So it's a foundation. And talking about your smaller suppliers and energy grid, since I got myself started on there, a lot of that same thinking happened back in 2007, 2006, I think. Do you remember with the ARA grants and Obama and the ARA grants pushing a lot of money into cybersecurity for the power grid, among many other things? In that time, you had huge mega electricity suppliers, and then you had the mom and pop shops, you had the municipals, and you've got the co-ops. And the idea was these smaller companies can't afford to do security right, and so a lot of the energy companies that were bigger pulled together and said, we have to do it right for them because they affect us. And so they tried to make it so that it was really easy, and they would give easy buttons to the smaller folks.
Right. Okay. I want to get to questions before we run out of time here. Thank you for that, Matt. One of the questions here, what would you say is the difference between the vehicle hackers and the aftermarket gray market industry that supports the racing tuning community? I'm not sure I understand that question.
Intent. So the goals are mildly different. There's definitely significant technology overlap and skill set overlap. In fact, I met a guy from a big tuning company within the last year or so who we had really fun conversations because our worlds collide left and right. Now his goals that he can talk about had more to do with enabling getting more torque and horsepower out of an engine, in changing the power curves and stuff that people care about for going fast, of which I'm one, but that's a different discussion. But our goals center around controlling the vehicle. Remote code execution is the term that I'm always pushing for. We can spoof things on the CAN bus, but I want to own the ECUs. I want to be able to shut off functionality that I don't like. I don't want there to be a message that tells me how fast or tells the other ECUs how fast we're going. So I'll just write that code right out of that ECU and then take over everything. Does that make sense? Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. But the intentional use is different. So maybe I'm a good guy and I want to help make vehicles safer, or maybe I'm a bad guy and I want to crash and cause chaos or reduce the efficiency of some foreign conglomerate trucking industry, for example. I use the word intentionality and now I just painted myself into a corner, but the desired effects, whether they be good or bad.
Yeah, and this contributor went on to say, and I think this is helping me understand the first question, do you see those aftermarket companies becoming more hacker-like as vehicles become more connected? And is there an insider threat at OEM and tiers that is growing to support the aftermarket?
Ooh, That's really interesting. Do you want to jump in on that, Jen?
Please go ahead.
Okay, so I will say that wow, that was 3 things I want to respond to, if I can remember them. What was the first part again?
So do you see the aftermarket companies becoming more hacker-like as vehicles become more connected?
I mean, maybe. I doubt it. Like, they have a revenue stream. They're actually very respectable folks who have a revenue stream. What does becoming more hacker-like look like? Is it stealing BMWs and whatnot because the technology they understand? Maybe. But that's a risk anybody takes. My company, or we would never do that. But that's more
that
of an individual.
We would never do that.
No, we would. But it's going to be a one-off where somebody leaves and takes takes their experience and skills to do something nefarious. That's actually more important. And this goes back to a conversation Jen and I had years ago about getting to know and trust people before teaching them to hack. We had a cybersecurity push for elementary and high school students, and I pushed back, going, they haven't shown their character yet, so I don't want to give them that bazooka if I don't know that they're not going to point it at somebody. Mm-hmm. So the next thing, what was the keep reading the question? Sorry, insider threat. Insider threat. Oh, at the OEs and suppliers, maybe. But here's the thing. Yeah, to support aftermarket. So here's the thing. Talking with several OEs, I've got several very good friends at each of the major domestic OEs, and they're not afraid of aftermarket. They're afraid of they don't want their intellectual property to be reduced in value. They don't want terrible things to be done with their vehicles. They don't want your safety to be reduced. That's their goal. As far as aftermarket's concerned, I was talking to one OEM who just implemented signed firmware on all their vehicles at boot up, like the ECU starts up and makes sure that nothing's changed and that it's signed. And his reaction was, the aftermarket is important. Modding is important. They can pop the chip off and just solder another chip down, because that's totally doable. And we don't care. We're worried about maintaining the safety and security of our fleets. And what was the last thing? There's one more.
No, it's okay. I think we've exhausted that question. Okay. And we have to be brief with this one because we're running out of time, but I think it's important. How does artificial intelligence, machine learning, complicate cybersecurity in autonomous vehicles? 20-second answer.
There's no way to know what AI is. Like it's like a human being. I'm not saying that we're to general intelligence or anything like that, but it's the Spaniards know how to differentiate. There's 2 words to know. There's to know, like, I know that this is blue. And then there's to know, like, I know Jennifer Tisdale. Like, I don't know Jennifer Tisdale. She's a very complex human being that I could never know, ever. I barely can know myself to some degree. So there's this word that says, I just don't know. And an AI falls into that. I can only know what I kind of know, and I'm not even sure about that. And that's the problem.
Europe, it's gonna definitely make it more complex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that was 20 seconds.
Are you throwing that to me?
I am.
Oh, I am just simply echoing what Matt said, because if he doesn't know, I don't know for sure. But what I do know is that we are having these conversations at length at an upcoming NDIA Cyber Physical Systems Security Summit in Troy, Michigan, May 7-8. We're going to explore all of those topics there too. I hope you'll join us.
And that's at the Troy Marriott.
Troy Marriott, that's right.
All right. Thank you both. Tremendous. I really appreciate you guys coming. Thanks everybody for contributing. Sorry we didn't get to all of the questions in the chat section there, but thanks again, Matt and Jen. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
You too.